Welcome to our channel. Today, we will learn about the life of Buster Keaton, a famous actor, director, and filmmaker. Buster was a remarkable talent in the film industry until the changes in Hollywood weakened his position. He faced a difficult life full of challenges. In 1966, he was hospitalized for a short time, feeling depressed and wanting to return home. But the doctors insisted that he stay longer. What he did not know was that his family was hiding a disturbing secret. Buster Keaton was born on October 4, 1895, in Piqua, Kansas. But that was not actually his hometown. His parents, both traveling vaudeville performers, were simply performing in the area at the time. Buster spent his childhood on the road, constantly moving from town to town with his parents. Some days were like a great adventure, while others felt like a nightmare. His parents, Joe and Myra Keaton, ran a traveling show with the famous performer Harry Houdini. Young Buster traveled with them, often sleeping in a suitcase at night. Buster grew up in the world of performers, but they soon realized that he was a challenging child. As a young boy, Buster often got into trouble. One day, Myra, feeling overwhelmed, put her son in a makeup chest while she went on stage, promising to come back for him. Buster followed her instructions and stayed in the chest, but in the chaos of the show, a stagehand accidentally closed the lid, trapping him inside. When Myra finished her performance and opened the chest, she was horrified to see Buster nearly suffocated. It was clear that the Keaton family needed a better way to handle Buster. Their methods of controlling him would be considered extreme by today's standards. They once tied him to a post like a dog to keep him quiet when he got too loud. And they even tried giving him alcohol in hopes of calming him down. When those approaches didn't work, Joe resorted to beating Buster to enforce discipline. It's evident that Buster Keaton had a lot to deal with as a child, but he was resilient. Interestingly, Buster's real name was Joseph. He got the nickname from the legendary performer Harry Houdini, a friend of Joe Keaton. One evening, while visiting the Keatons, Houdini found their 18-month-old son falling down the stairs. Everyone was horrified, but the child simply bounced back. Houdini remarked, "He's just a regular Buster," and the name stuck. However, this was not the last time Buster Keaton fell. Buster Keaton began performing on stage at the age of 3. Were child labor laws in effect at the time? Yes, they were, and the Keaton family had to deal with social workers and allegations of abuse. However, authorities were concerned not only about Buster's young age, but also about the nature of the act. This included Myra playing music while Joe and Buster performed. Buster would taunt his father, and then Joe would throw him across the stage. Sometimes Buster would crash into scenery, and on particularly wild nights, Joe would even send him flying into the audience. This was not the story of a shy boy being thrown around against his will. He quickly mastered how to fall safely, a skill that became invaluable when he moved on to a film career. His parents promoted him as the boy who couldn't be hurt. Unfortunately, while Buster could handle any fall, Hollywood eventually found other ways to challenge him. Buster Keaton often felt uncertain about what to expect when performing with his father, Joe Keaton. Joe was a heavy drinker with unpredictable moods. Buster learned to brace himself for trouble whenever he smelled whiskey on his father's breath from across the stage. On those nights, he sometimes found himself in the crowd instead of performing, but he still enjoyed sharing the stage with his father. In fact, he enjoyed it so much that he didn't realize how it appeared to the audience. When they saw him flying across the stage, they assumed he was having a bad time, but he often laughed heartily. However, Buster noticed that the audience didn't find it funny when he laughed. When he tried to maintain a straight, expressionless face, they found it amusing. This is how the iconic stone-faced character was created. Although Buster cherished his wild childhood, he knew that all good things must come to an end. He witnessed the rise of a new form of entertainment movies. Joe despised this new medium and refused to participate, but Buster was open to it. As Joe became increasingly ashamed of his drinking, Buster's mother, Myra, took him to New York. By this time, Buster was a young man, finally free from his father's control. He was eager to pursue a film career, but fate intervened. Before he could chase his dream, World War I broke out. Buster served in the American Expeditionary Force in France for 7 months. During that time, he spent only one night in bed. The rest of the time, he slept on the ground in factories, warehouses, and stables. Buster was not the strongest soldier. He quickly developed an ear infection from the cold nights, which left him deaf in one ear and nearly killed him. One night, while stationed at the front, Buster played cards before returning to his barracks. As he approached the entrance, a soldier shouted for the password, but Buster did not hear. The soldier repeated his warning, but Buster continued on until he heard the sound of a rifle, a noise that pierced his damaged eardrums. He stopped, narrowly avoiding being shot. Although he returned to New York unharmed, his hearing never fully recovered. For the rest of his life, his hearing problems drove him nearly insane, causing him to constantly worry about missing important sounds, just as he had missed the sentry's calls. Fortunately, he completed his military service, but now he faced another challenge. Upon returning to New York after his time in Europe, 21-year-old Buster Keaton met Fatty Arbuckle at Talmadge Studios. Arbuckle was so impressed with Buster that he quickly assigned him to his films. In just 3 years, they collaborated on 14 films. Buster, who had grown up acting, showed a natural talent for comedy, and his partnership with Arbuckle helped launch his career. However, this success was abruptly halted by a scandal in 1921 involving a grisly murder case in which Arbuckle became the prime suspect. Although he was eventually cleared, the scandal destroyed Arbuckle's reputation. He was blacklisted by the studios and struggled to find work, living in obscurity until his sudden death from a heart attack at the age of 46. In a bitter twist, while Arbuckle faced failure, Buster saw opportunity. Although he was unable to save his friend and mentor, he did not let it hold him back. Buster took over Arbuckle's former production company and founded Buster Keaton Productions. Over the next 6 years, he produced some of the best work of his career. During this time, Buster also found love. He married actress Natalie Talmadge, one of his co-stars, on May 31, 1921. It was a case of mixing business with pleasure, as Natalie's sister, the famous silent film actress Norma Talmadge, co-owned the Talmadge studio where Buster worked. Their story may seem like a fairy tale. 2 silent film actors meet on a film set, fall in love, and live happily ever after. However, that was not the case. It marked the beginning of Buster's troubles. The relationship was doomed from the start. First, the only thing Buster and Natalie had in common was their love of acting. Buster was notorious for being a womanizer, while Natalie was still a virgin when they married. In addition, Buster lived a frugal life, while Natalie tended to spend lavishly. Their marriage was on the rocks and was sure to get worse. As the film industry moved west, so did the newlyweds Buster and Natalie. Buster surprised Natalie with a modest and cozy cottage he designed as a wedding present, which I thought was a lovely romantic gesture. Natalie's reaction, however, was harsh. She was furious with Buster, angry that he had built such a small cottage, which had not even enough room for a servant. Despite his efforts to build the cottage, Buster still adhered to Natalie's strict wishes. He sold the house and spent $300,000 to build a lavish mansion in Beverly Hills. Buster and Natalie had 2 sons, Joseph, born in 1922, and Robert, born in 1924. Like many couples, they may have believed that having children would solve their problems. However, this was often not the case, and in their situation, it only exacerbated their issues. Natalie hated sharing a bed with her husband, and after Robert was born, she declared that she was closing up business. This was more than just a symbolic statement. She permanently banished Buster from their bedroom. He ended up in the spare room of a house he never wanted to live in the first place. But at least he was a movie star, and for good reason. Buster did all his own stunts and created some of the most memorable scenes in movie history. However, performing your own stunts can lead to serious injuries. One of the most famous pranks involving Buster Keaton features him standing in front of a house when the entire facade suddenly collapses on him, but he is saved by a well-placed open window. This prank has been reenacted countless times, but Buster did it for real. Had he miscalculated, he could have been crushed by the falling house. Fortunately, no house collapsed on Buster Keaton during filming, although one stunt nearly cost him his life. Buster suffered his most serious injury while filming Sherlock Jr. in 1924. During one scene, he was walking in front of a train. As the train moved out of frame, he grabbed a water hose, which opened and soaked him. During the scene, he appears to float in mid-air for a moment before stumbling out of the water below, seemingly unharmed. However, he later reported having a headache. After self-medicating with Jack Daniels for a few days, he decided to see a doctor. The doctor then revealed a shocking truth: Buster had actually broken his neck during the stunt. Did this stop him? Absolutely not. His films became more ambitious, and he began working on what he hoped would be his greatest masterpiece. By 1926, that masterpiece was complete: The General. Unfortunately, that's when things started to go wrong. Today, critics consider The General to be Buster's best work and one of the greatest films ever made, but at the time, it was widely hated. The Civil War was still a sensitive subject, and critics found it too serious to be a comedy. Worse still, the film was extremely expensive to produce and ended up being a box office failure. Keaton risked everything to make his best film, but that effort ultimately led to his downfall. When a studio gives you complete creative control over your film, and it ends up being a flop, they won't give you that chance again. After his film failed, Buster found himself out of work and had to do something he never expected. He signed with MGM, the biggest studio in Hollywood. He thought MGM would help him, but instead, it became a burden. Buster later said that signing with MGM was the worst decision of his life. The charm of his early films came from his ability to make his ideas come true, whether it meant jumping off a rooftop or letting a house collapse on him. It was this individuality that made his best films possible. MGM, however, had other ideas. Buster Keaton could no longer perform his own stunts, and the studio controlled every aspect of his decisions. As a result, the quality of his films dropped dramatically, and the introduction of sound in films ultimately ended his career. Buster disliked sound films, which paled in comparison to his earlier work. Once one of the biggest stars in Hollywood, he was quickly falling into obscurity. His personal life was no better. Buster began to sink deeper into despair. Like many other stars facing turmoil, Buster turned to alcohol and infidelity. His wife refused to share the same bed, leading him to have affairs with actresses Dorothy Sebastian and Kathleen Key. Unfortunately, these actions did not solve his problems. His drinking problem worsened, creating a vicious cycle where the worse his movies became, the more he drank, which led to even worse movies. And as if that weren't enough, he faced bankruptcy. Throughout their marriage, Natalie often demanded lavish gifts, reportedly spending up to a third of his income, and she also felt ashamed of him. The last years of Keaton's marriage were tumultuous, and he wasn't entirely blameless. His love life was just beginning. Buster Keaton wasn't the obsessive shopper his wife was, but he had his own problems. He began gambling at the height of his career, often losing $50,000 in a single hand of poker. This wasn't a serious problem when he was at the peak of his fame, but it became significant when his career stalled. Buster and Natalie's marriage lasted more than 10 years, but by 1932, Natalie had reached her limit. She divorced Buster Keaton that year, and the split was not amicable. She took their sons with her and changed her last name to Talmadge. As the marriage fell apart, Buster was unable to see his children, and his films lost their appeal. If his drinking had been a problem before, it only got worse. Until then, Buster had largely kept his problems from affecting his work, but that changed after his wife left him. He began arriving on set drunk, reminiscent of his father years earlier. His behavior attracted negative attention, and even MGM chief Louis Burt Mayer personally told him to stop. Buster, however, did not care. In 1933, MGM decided that the once great silent film star was too much trouble and fired him. Was this rock bottom? Not yet. In 1925, Buster Keaton was a success. By 1933, however, his life had spiraled downward. His wife left him, his films flopped, and he was nearly bankrupt. His drinking problem got so severe that he was committed to a mental hospital, hitting rock bottom. Despite this, Buster still had a gift for making people laugh. At one point, his daughter jokingly put a straitjacket on him, forgetting that he had earned the nickname Buster. Doctors were amazed to find that he had broken free of his restraints, recalling some of the tricks Harry Houdini had taught him. The upside of hitting rock bottom was that the only way left was up. The experience motivated Buster to quit drinking. He underwent rigorous aversion therapy, which kept him sober for 5 years. However, despite kicking the habit, he faced many challenges in the years that followed. Once Buster was sober, he was able to start working again, but his star days were over. He took any job he could find, writing jokes for groups like the Marx Brothers and the Three Stooges, earning a fraction of what he once did. It would take a miracle to turn Buster's life around. Fortunately, that miracle came, and her name was Eleanor. In 1938, a young dancer named Eleanor Norris wanted to improve her bridge skills and heard that an older, washed-up star was one of the best players in Hollywood. One evening, she visited Buster's house, where a friend had introduced them. Buster was 42 and exhausted by life. Eleanor was 19, attractive, and full of energy. They seemed like an unlikely couple, but they turned out to be the perfect match. Eleanor Norris was Buster Keaton's true love, although their relationship did not begin with immediate attraction. Norris played bridge at Buster's house several times a week, but she barely interacted with him for a year. Things changed when another player made negative comments about her bridge skills. Eleanor defended herself fiercely, and in doing so, she caught Buster's attention. When Buster Keaton married Eleanor Norris in 1940, many were surprised, as Buster had a reputation as a fallen star who had suffered significant setbacks, while Eleanor, who was 23 years his junior, was the one who would help Buster overcome his difficulties. Eleanor provided everything that Buster's first wife lacked. She recognized his genius and supported his creative endeavors. More importantly, she provided the structure he desperately needed. She rejuvenated his career by helping him control his drinking and manage his finances. After the release of The General, Buster faced a series of disappointments, but Eleanor brought hope back into his life. Although Buster Keaton never regained the fame he had enjoyed in the 1920s, he had a pleasant end to his career. After years of being overlooked, audiences began to rediscover his work. He started appearing on television shows, where he was able to showcase his classic stunts, continuing to entertain well into his 50s. Despite the many challenges he faced, Buster Keaton was able to cherish his later years. Despite some difficult times, 1962 marked a pivotal moment for Buster Keaton. He was scheduled to star in a new television show alongside comedian Ernie Kovacs. Unfortunately, a tragic event prevented the show from airing. On January 12, 1962, Buster and Kovacs filmed scenes together. The next morning, Kovacs lost control of his Chevy Corvair while making a turn and crashed into a telephone pole, killing him instantly. As a result, the show featuring Buster was never produced. In early 1966, Buster began to suffer from a persistent cough. Doctors diagnosed him with severe bronchitis and sent him home. However, as his symptoms worsened, he was eventually admitted to the hospital. As the days passed, Buster became increasingly restless, eager to return home. Little did he know that both his doctors and his family were hiding a devastating truth. Buster Keaton did not have bronchitis. He had lung cancer. His family chose not to inform him of his condition. In his final days, he wandered around the hospital, confused as to why he couldn't go home. He died on February 1, 1966, at the age of 70. His wife said that the day before he died, he was still well enough to play cards. Buster Keaton passed away with his wife Eleanor by his side. Someone who was truly worthy of him better than Natalie Talmadge and his second wife. As for his marriages, Buster's first was terrible, but his second was even worse. In 1933, while in a rehabilitation facility, he married his nurse, May Scriven. His memories of that wedding day, however, are disturbing. He barely remembers anything, claiming that he was too drunk to recall the ceremony. It seems he wasn't the only one who made bad choices that day. May Scriven was very different from Eleanor Norris. She didn't have deep feelings for Buster Keaton. In fact, she didn't even know his real name when they married. What she truly loved was the idea of marrying a movie star. Buster's friends accused her of taking advantage of him during a difficult time in his life, and it's hard not to believe them when their marriage fell apart almost immediately. In the end, May Scriven really didn't want to be a movie star's wife. She divorced Buster within 3 years and demanded nearly all of his remaining money. If Eleanor Norris hadn't come to Buster's aid then, who knows what would have happened to the greatest comedian in history. Buster Keaton, the master of silent films, is renowned for his unique blend of humor and comedy. Despite the numerous challenges he faced throughout his life, he emerged as a legendary figure and had a profound impact on the world of cinema. Buster's work continues to serve as a lasting symbol of his artistry, inspiring laughter and admiration from audiences worldwide. We hope you enjoy this exploration of Buster Keaton's life. This file concludes here. Thank you for joining us. After Margaret Sullivan's passing, her daughter revealed the hidden truth about the infamous love triangle involving her mother, Jimmy Stewart, and Henry Fonda. What she disclosed was far more shocking than anyone had imagined. Today, let's explore the fascinating story of Jimmy Stewart. Before becoming one of Hollywood's most celebrated stars, Jimmy Stewart was just a quiet, introverted kid with big dreams of flying planes. As a boy, he spent countless hours in his basement tinkering with model airplanes, lost in his own world. Back then, he wasn't exactly remarkable. His grades were mediocre, and his teachers often caught him dozing off. But he had a hidden talent. The story goes that one day, at his father's hardware store, a customer couldn't pay his bill and offered an accordion as payment. In a twist straight out of It's a Wonderful Life, the local barber stepped in to teach young Jimmy how to play. Though Jimmy dreamed of becoming a pilot, his father had other plans. Following family tradition, Jimmy was expected to attend Princeton University and eventually take over the family hardware business. Ever the dutiful son, he followed his father's wishes and enrolled at Princeton in 1928. He even earned a generous scholarship for graduate studies after completing his undergraduate degree. But instead of continuing down that path, he made a decision that stunned everyone. After years of dedication to his studies, Jimmy chose to follow his heart and join a theater company. It was here that fate introduced him to Henry Fonda and Margaret Sullivan. The three became inseparable friends, but their connection was far more complicated than it seemed. This was the beginning of one of Hollywood's most legendary love triangles. While Jimmy and Fonda grew close as friends, Jimmy also found himself falling for the charming and beautiful Margaret Sullivan. Summoning all his courage, he eventually asked her out. Sullivan later recalled his proposal as the most heartfelt and sincere she'd ever received, though it was also awkward. After turning him down, Sullivan's heart was soon claimed by none other than Henry Fonda. The two married in 1931, but Sullivan's fondness for Jimmy never wavered. She believed wholeheartedly that he had the potential to achieve greatness in Hollywood. By 1936, Jimmy Stewart had signed a contract with MGM, though his early roles were far from impressive. Meanwhile, Sullivan was thriving as a leading lady under Universal Pictures. But she wasn't about to leave Jimmy behind. When she came across the script for Next Time We Love, she knew the role of her leading man was perfect for him. There was just one hiccup. Universal had no idea who Jimmy Stewart was. Thanks to Sullivan's persistence, The studio agreed to give him a screen test, and he landed the part. And just like that, Margaret Sullivan became the catalyst for Jimmy Stewart's rise to stardom. At the time, Jimmy was far from the confident actor we'd later come to know. Young and inexperienced, he felt completely out of his depth on this big production. Even the director, Edward H. Griffith, began poking fun at his awkwardness on set. Determined to help him improve, she took it upon herself to coach him in the evenings. Under her guidance, Jimmy gradually began to tone down the clumsy mannerisms that, ironically, would later become one of his most endearing traits. Sullivan's efforts paid off, and even the director was impressed. MGM's Bill Grady, stunned by Jimmy's transformation, reportedly said the actor returned to the studio as a completely different person. But just as things seemed to be turning around for Jimmy professionally, he faced personal disappointment. In 1936, Sullivan remarried, but not to him. Coincidence? Maybe, but it definitely raised some eyebrows. While Jimmy quietly pined for Sullivan over the years, it was her first husband, Henry Fonda, who introduced him to his first Hollywood romance. In 1935, Jimmy began his infamous bachelor era with a short-lived fling with the legendary dancer Ginger Rogers. Their chemistry was undeniable, both on and off screen, as seen in the 1938 film Vivacious Lady. Behind the scenes, their relationship was fiery, with Rogers reportedly being his first romantic partner. At the time, he was 30. After Rogers, Jimmy's career brought him back into Margaret Sullivan's orbit. The two reunited in 1938 for their second film together, The Shop-Worn Angel. It is impossible not to notice that the affection Jimmy had for Sullivan went beyond just work. Walter Pidgeon, who played the third part of the film's love triangle, later remarked how obvious it was that Jimmy was in love with her. During the filming of The Shop-Worn Angel, Jimmy was also seeing another Hollywood star, Norma Shearer. Their passionate fling lasted 6 weeks. Loretta Young, known for her beauty and virtuous reputation, was next in line. While she fell hard for Jimmy, it became clear he didn't feel the same way. Predictably, their relationship fizzled out, leaving Young heartbroken. Jimmy, however, wasn't ready to settle down just yet. Life as a bachelor was far too tempting, offering endless opportunities. The next leading lady in Jimmy Stewart's life was Marlene Dietrich, and their affair was as scandalous as it was short-lived. The two grew close while filming Destry Rides Again in 1939, despite the fact that Dietrich was married. However, their romance came to an abrupt and dramatic end when Dietrich revealed she was pregnant. Jimmy, far from overjoyed, expressed his desire for her to terminate the pregnancy. Dietrich went through with the abortion, but the relationship was irreparably damaged. By the time filming wrapped, Jimmy had cut ties for good, leaving Dietrich heartbroken. In her memoir, she barely mentioned Jimmy, dismissing their affair as insignificant in a manner that painted him as just another fleeting romance in her life. It was a cold that painted Jimmy as just another fleeting romance in her life. By 1940, while his love life remained rocky, his career was soaring to new heights. That year turned out to be a major turning point for Jimmy professionally. He reunited with his favorite co-star, Margaret Sullivan, on 2 projects, including The Shop Around the Corner. But the real highlight of 1940 came with the romantic comedy The Philadelphia Story, where he shared the screen with Hollywood icons Cary Grant and Katharine Hepburn. Critics praised Jimmy's comedic timing, and the movie became a massive box office hit, cementing his status as one of Hollywood's brightest stars. Behind the scenes, though, Jimmy struggled with nerves. Thankfully, Noel Coward stepped in with some much-needed encouragement, helping him push through his self-doubt. In the end, Jimmy delivered a performance that earned him the highest honor of his career. At the 1941 Academy Awards, both Jimmy and his former roommate Henry Fonda were nominated for Best Actor. This time, it was Jimmy who walked away with the Oscar for his role in The Philadelphia Story. However, for Jimmy, the win was bittersweet. Jimmy privately believed he didn't deserve the award. feeling it was more of a consolation prize after losing the previous year for Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. Some speculated that the Academy was making up for that earlier loss. Before the war swept him away, Jimmy had one last notable romance, and it nearly led to marriage. He became deeply involved with Olivia de Havilland, a fellow screen legend. In fact, Jimmy proposed to her, but de Havilland turned him down, as she believed he was not yet ready for the commitment of marriage. There was another reason too. During their courtship, de Havilland had fallen for director John Huston. Ultimately, she chose Huston over Jimmy, leaving him heartbroken once again. Jimmy Stewart's path to the altar was anything but smooth, and his life took a dramatic turn when World War II erupted. Coming from a fiercely patriotic family, he didn't think twice about stepping up to serve. In fact, he became the first major Hollywood star to enlist, but there was a hitch. His lanky frame didn't meet the Army's weight requirements. Determined, he spent months bulking up, and by February 1941, he was ready to serve his country. However, the war would leave an indelible mark on him. His passion for aviation led him to become a pilot, and he was later sent into combat. Remarkably, he climbed the ranks from private to colonel in just 4 years, fought in Germany, and earned the prestigious Croix de Guerre. Amid the chaos of war, he even found time for romance. At the Hollywood Canteen, a club for servicemen, he met singer Dinah Shore. The two were very close to getting married, but he backed out at the last minute. Still, compared to the horrors of war, a broken engagement was hardly his biggest concern. Jimmy rarely spoke about his wartime experiences, but the toll it took on him was evident. A biographer revealed that the trauma deeply affected him. He barely ate during long stretches of his service and endured immense emotional strain. Over the course of 20 missions, his anxiety only grew. One of the most devastating moments came when his squadron went on a mission without him. 130 men killed. The tragedy haunted him, and when he finally returned home, his family barely recognized him. He was gaunt, aged beyond his years. Jimmy's acting career seemed to be at a standstill. He even considered leaving Hollywood altogether to work in his family's business. But fate had other plans. Director Frank Capra offered him a lifeline, casting him in what would become his most iconic film, It's a Wonderful Life. Interestingly, Jimmy wasn't initially thrilled about the role. When asked what kind of project he wanted to take on after the war, his response was heartbreakingly indifferent. So when Capra approached him with the part of George Bailey, Jimmy wasn't particularly enthusiastic, especially when he learned that the character contemplates suicide. With limited options, however, he reluctantly accepted the role. Though It's a Wonderful Life is now celebrated as a heartwarming Christmas classic, the production was anything but cheerful. Jimmy, still grappling with his wartime trauma, was tense throughout filming. He constantly doubted his abilities and questioned whether he should quit acting altogether. Behind the scenes, it was a grueling experience, but the film ultimately cemented his legacy as one of Hollywood's most beloved stars. Jimmy Stewart poured every ounce of his passion into some of the most emotional performances of his career. But his efforts couldn't save It's a Wonderful Life from flopping at the box office. Hard to believe now, right? The film didn't even recoup its production costs when it was first released. Yet, in a twist no one could have predicted, it eventually found new life and became a beloved classic. These days, it's hailed as one of the greatest films ever made. Even Jimmy himself came around. He eventually admitted it was his favorite of all the movies he ever starred in. Still, Jimmy wasn't always celebrated in his time. Many of his most iconic films didn't gain recognition until years later. Take his collaborations with Alfred Hitchcock, for instance. Together, they made unforgettable thrillers like Rear Window and Vertigo. When Vertigo bombed critically and commercially, Hitchcock reportedly blamed Jimmy, saying he looked too old for the role. Pretty harsh, especially considering Jimmy had just spent 4 grueling years in World War II. To make matters worse, when Hitchcock cast his next film, North by Northwest, he passed over Jimmy. Instead, he chose Cary Grant, who was 4 years older than Jimmy. While his career had its share of letdowns, Jimmy's personal life found stability later on. Known as quite the ladies' man in his younger days, Jimmy finally settled down in his 40s when he met Gloria Haytrick MacLaine. Their first meeting, at a Christmas party in 1947, didn't exactly go smoothly. Jimmy had a bit too much to drink. But fate gave him a second chance. A year later, at a dinner party hosted by his friend Gary Cooper, Jimmy met Gloria again. This time, he managed to win her over. The two married in 1949, and by all accounts, Jimmy was a devoted husband and father from that point on. Their marriage brought him 2 adopted sons, and in 1951, the couple welcomed twin daughters. Jimmy, a proud veteran of World War II, had hoped his sons would follow in his patriotic footsteps. Tragically, his eldest son, Ronald, died in Vietnam in 1969, a loss that deeply affected Jimmy, and that wasn't the only grief he endured. Nearly a decade earlier, in 1960, Jimmy lost someone who had once meant a great deal to him, Margaret Sullivan. Sullivan lost her hearing and eventually succumbed to a mental breakdown. His wife later admitted that he was never quite the same after losing Sullivan. Jimmy's heartbreak didn't stop there. He outlived Gloria too, and her death left a void he never truly filled. Despite these personal tragedies, his reputation has largely remained untarnished, though one surprising revelation did surface after Sullivan's passing. In a memoir written by Sullivan's daughter Brooke, it was revealed that Sullivan and Jimmy had secretly carried on a year-long affair. This occurred during her marriage to Jimmy's close friend, Henry Fonda. It was a hidden chapter in the life of a man whose public image was otherwise wholesome and dignified. Through it all, successes, failures, love, and loss, Jimmy Stewart's life was as complex and layered as the characters he so brilliantly brought to the screen. After losing his wife Gloria in 1994, the actor struggled with heartbreak. Just 3 years later, he passed away from heart failure. However, his final moments weren't lonely, as his loved ones were by his side, and the entire nation grieved his loss. Even President Bill Clinton referred to him as a national treasure, an exceptional actor, a true gentleman, and a devoted patriot. Thank you for listening to Jimmy Stewart's story. If you found it interesting, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you next time.